Hello and welcome. You're watching Life with Matthew. And did you know that I have a Subscribestar and Patreon account? There's something I set up because that's something you do when you have a hobby like YouTube, or Rumble, I guess. I tried to set up some tiers that gave basic rewards that, honestly, I have no idea if they're a good idea or not because I have no idea what I'm doing. So for the higher two tiers, I said, you know what, pick a movie and I'll talk about it. Well, recently, I actually got a subscriber. Thank you so much, John. And he asked if I could go over Master and Commander, and yeah, actually that would be super easy. Master and Commander is one of the first DVDs I ever purchased. Somehow I got a hold of one of those Columbia Record Company ads for DVDs. You know, buy 5 DVDs for the price of one, and as long as you buy 10 more within a year, you keep it all. Of course, if you don't buy the other 10, then you have to pay full price for the other 4, and there are a lot of very specific rules for which DVDs actually count toward your 10 required purchases. And of course, by this point, you fall into the sunk cost logical fallacy, but you keep putting it off until the last minute when you buy 10 mediocre DVDs just so you don't get hit with the overinflated price of the first 5. Anyways, Master and Commander was one of the first 5 I bought that were all really good. So yeah, I could talk a lot about many aspects of the movie. Like the sound design. Have you ever really paid attention to the sound and music of a movie? Iron Man has music before you hit the minute mark. Captain America Civil War, music as soon as the movie starts. Jackie Chan's First Strike, music as soon as the movie starts. Murder by Death, My Neighbor Totoro, Indiana Jones, Saving Private Ryan, Star Wars, UHF, they all start with some music. Master and Commander, however, waits 13 minutes before any music starts, and even then it only lasts for 1 minute before quickly fading as the men are ordered silence. Yet despite the lack of background music, Master and Commander creates an atmosphere that fully draws you into the movie with the sound of the ship creaking, the wind in the sails, the storm raging, the men busy at work with life on a ship. The way every moment fully commands your attention was masterfully done. Or I could talk about how while the ship is becalmed, one of the men is insubordinate to Mr. Hullum and is disciplined, after which you get to see this amazing scene where everyone pays their respect to him, the whole time making you feel increasingly claustrophobic as a wide-angle shot is slowly filled up with people until there are even people between Hullum and the camera. Or just a sheer number of great lines that fills this movie, such as,
"The simple truth is not all of us become the men we once hoped we might be."
Anyways, I asked John if there's anything in particular he wanted me to look at, and he mentioned that there are some aspects of the film that remind me of Star Trek. I was wondering if you would have the same impression. Well, crap. I'd never thought about it like that, but I rewatched it, and I have to say, now that I've seen it, I can't imagine how I missed it all this time. And having seen a movie that front to back drips of Star Trek, how could I distill the sheer totality of 1,000 small details in a coherent reason for why Master and Commander may have been the best Star Trek film made in the 2000s, despite it being based on a series of books from the 70s, and notably missing spaceships and Star Treks? Well, it took me a bit, but I think I've been able to narrow it down to these 4 main points. The easiest reason Master and Commander comes across as Trek-like is because we've seen this storyline before. Imagine, if you will, 2 ships, neither one exactly sure where the other is, and yet the 2 captains of these ships, through their wit and guile, are able to pinpoint exactly where the enemy would be and get moments of strategic superiority against one another. And after a few of these back and forths, our protagonist manages to pull off a decisive victory over the enemy, save their ship, and during the course of the battle, the captains garner a bit of professional respect for one another, even though they are enemies. Now, any fan of the original series will definitely be thinking of Balance of Terror at this point, a sci-fi twist on the excellent film The Enemy Below. But that general plotline could also be seen in Starship Down of DS9, or the last bit of the Voyager episode Extreme Risk, where the newly commissioned Delta Flyer is fighting the Malons in the atmosphere of a gas giant, or the battle in the Mutara Nebula in the Wrath of Khan. Alright, it might be a bit of a stretch to say that Master and Commander's plotline is lifted straight from Star Trek, or vice versa. In fact, one might even argue that the idea of 2 enemies locked in combat without, frankly, almost magical sensors that can pinpoint life from the edges of a solar system would by its very nature create this back and forth struggle where each captain gets the momentary advantage until our hero finally wins the day. I mean, let's face it, that's just good story writing. Very few people enjoy a story where the good guys win every single encounter with the villains and never experience any kind of setback of any sort, so of course, this back and forth is going to be present. However, when I watch The Enemy Below, I don't feel like I'm watching Star Trek on the sea, despite the fact that Balance of Terror was literally based on it. I felt like I was watching an excellent war film where a destroyer was fighting a sub. The difference here is that in The Enemy Below, the point of the movie was the plot of the movie. The point was precisely that it is a war movie. Yes, there were larger issues at hand. The pushing of soldiers resulting in accidents, the U-boat captain who was ashamed at the actions of his country and yet still loyal to that country, the mutual respect that can exist between honorable men of war. But at the end of the day, the point of The Enemy Below is that it is a war movie in which a lone destroyer is pitted against an enemy possessing a clear technological advantage.
Man, a sub ain't no match for us.
Oh, they ain't, huh? Then how come they hunt U-boats with 3 destroyers working together up in the North Atlantic?
What about Balance of Terror then? Despite the fact that, broadly speaking, the plot of A Balance of Terror is a sci-fi retelling of The Enemy Below's plot, that's not the point of the episode. The plot that the Enterprise finds itself in is mere window dressing for the point of the episode. The point of The Balance of Terror is an investigation of how 2 nation-states, locked into a mindset of Cold War with no diplomatic contact, could prejudice people into presuming the worst about one another, to the point that a Cold War was turned hot even though both sides, if given the chance, would have been able to be friends with one another.
I regret that we meet in this way. You and I are of a kind, in a different reality. I could have called you friend.
And that's just a surface reading of the episode. There are issues about questioning one's loyalty because they come from a certain place or look a certain way.
I was suggesting that Mr. Spock could probably translate it for you, sir.
I assume you're complimenting Mr. Spock on his ability to decode.
I'm not sure, sir.
Leave any bigotry in your quarters. There's no room for it on the bridge.
Something that could be a commentary on the Red Scare witch hunts of the time that persisted far after the McCarthy hearings.
I'm pointing out that we could have Romulan spies aboard this ship. You know that, Mr. Science Officer. You're the expert in these people, but you've always left out that one point. Why? I'm very interested in why.
Issues about blind obedience among soldiers.
No need to tell you what happens the moment we reach home with proof of the Earthmen's weakness. And we will have proof. The Earth Commander will follow. He must.
About just wars and unjust rulers.
Obedience. Duty. Death and more death. Soon even enough for the Praetor's taste.
Of letting the wars of the past bind us into actions in the present.
There was a Captain Stiles in the Space Service then. 2 commanders, several junior officers. All lost in that war, sir.
Their war, Mr. Stiles.
Look, this isn't a video about The Balance of Terror. Suffice to say, it's a complex episode that goes far beyond the synopsis of the plot you'll find in the TV guide. And that is what makes Master and Commander feel so similar to an episode of Star Trek. While the plot may be summarized by a 10-second text display as the movie starts, the point of the movie goes far beyond the plot. The plot of the movie is mere window dressing. It's a backdrop that exists just so we can explore deeper issues of the human condition. For proof, you need to look no further than this scene that takes place between the captain, Jack Aubrey, and the ship's surgeon, Dr. Martin. This takes place immediately after we see the captain having to choose between the possibility of saving one crew member at the cost of capsizing the boat, or cutting the ship free of the fallen mast and definitely losing the crewmen. The choice made was absolutely the right one, but it still clearly weighs heavily on Jack's mind just to have Dr. Martin confront him as a friend and say they should have turned back weeks ago, and that the pursuit of the stronger, faster, better armed Acheron smacks of pride. The captain's response is that he will pursue it, whatever the cost.
This is a ship of war, and I will grind whatever grist the mill requires in order to fulfill my duty.
Whatever the cost.
Whatever the cost.
Yet despite claiming that, 30 minutes later, with Dr. Martin severely wounded from an accidental shooting, Captain Jack spots the sails of the enemy ship. He has the enemy dead to rights. It's the condition he's been waiting for the whole movie. And Captain Jack turns around so they can perform surgery on the doctor on land. Because the point of the movie isn't just its simple plot, but on the cost of duty and the value of a true friend. In every series of Star Trek, we've watched the crew of the various ships as they boldly went where no man has gone before, seeking out new lives and new civilizations. Oftentimes, that would result in them beaming down to the planet of the week. Sometimes even, that planet of the week was Earth. But even when we watched Sisko sitting at his father's restaurant cleaning clams, we knew that he wasn't home. That his home was back on Deep Space Nine. We always felt the relief along with Nog and of course the other members of the crew of the Defiant when they pulled back up to Deep Space Nine because like them, we knew that they had made it back home. And while Deep Space Nine may seem like a bit of a no-brainer for being home-like since it was a giant space station that dwarfed even a Galaxy-class ship, the truth is, in each series, from the opulence of the Galaxy class to the sleek look of the Intrepid class to the familiar utilitarian look of the Constitution class, even to the cramped feeling of the NX class gave, each of them was more than just a ship they served on. It was more than just a place that they had a bunk to lie down on the end of a long, hard shift. It was their home. Going into the final act of Master and Commander, the crew of the Surprise have at last thought of a means to win the battle by disguising themselves as a whaling ship. With the bait set and the enemy's vessel, the Artron, coming up fast, Captain Jack gives his men one final rousing speech.
So it's every hand to his rope or gun? Quick's the word and sharp's the action. After all, Surprise is on our side.
Now sure, a British commander gives a speech and you huzzah! That's practically a given. But the men aren't cheering just because he said something rousing. They're cheering because he said something they actually believe in.
This ship is England.
They all honestly believe that this ship, the Surprise, is a piece of England that safely carries them in and out of danger. And just like Janeway, when that ship was damaged, they worked hard to get it back to rights. For the figurehead to be correctly carved, for every last bit to be clean and painted. This isn't a mere vessel for transporting you from one place to another. This is where they live. They're not just concerned about the shape being ship-shaped for sailing. But they're concerned about their home looking her best. Think about it. Why is it that when Luke's X-Wing is seen beneath the water in The Last Jedi, the reaction is meh? But when we see Han board the Millennium Falcon, there's excitement. It's not just that we're excited because Han and Chewie are excited, it's because we actually feel the same way they do. It's not just an X-Wing getting them from point A to point B. The Falcon has been with us since the very beginning. The Falcon is where we saw Luke take his first steps on his path to becoming a Jedi. It's where we saw Luke comforted after the loss of Obi-Wan. It's where Han and Leia developed a relationship. The Falcon is home. Likewise, Star Trek is rife with examples of the crew treating the ship like it's their home. Like this scene from Voyager, where Janeway finds that the ship's commissioning plaque has been knocked off the wall. A thinly veiled metaphor for her not upholding the ideals of the Federation for the first time. Well, the first time in her own mind at any rate. And how reverently she replaces it, not because the plaque is important per se, but because it's a part of her home, and that's what's important. Or this scene from Deep Space Nine where Sisko stands on the outside, watching the ceremony take place over the depleted phaser bank. It hurts him to watch from the outside, because this ship has become his home while Deep Space Nine was under Dominion control, and it hurts to be separated from it. And maybe the best example from all Star Trek that I've found for this idea that the ship is your home is found in the motion picture. The motion picture certainly has its fair share of flaws, and I understand those who derisively refer to it as Star Trek 2001 for its slow-paced and meandering storytelling. But one thing it unequivocally got right was Kirk's reaction to seeing the Enterprise for the first time after its retrofit. Well, Kirk said it best in Star Trek IV.
My friends, we've come home.
Even more than the ship being home, one of the reasons that watching Master and Commander is going to give you that feeling that you're watching some ocean-faring version of Star Trek is because, like Star Trek, the ship is a character within the story. Now, this one can be a bit hard to explain. After all, when you talk about who the characters are in a show or a movie, you think about anything with a speaking part, or even a crowd of extras if you're feeling extra generous that day. Talking choice as characters? Not a problem. A talking car? You bet. A Maltese Falcon? No. Things aren't typically regarded as a character. They're MacGuffins. They're things that the characters care about that drive the plot forward, but that the audience itself doesn't necessarily care about. Like the Death Star plans. We, the audience, don't care about them, but we do care that Leia cares about them. Their importance is imparted by the caring of a character that we do care about. In Master and Commander, however, we get the feeling that the ship is also one of the crew members. The ship is the first character you're introduced to as we prowl across her decks in the dead of night, seeing her cannons and her rigging, the shadows of others crossing the camera as they go about their tasks. In the midst of the storm later on, you can practically feel the ship pushing herself past her limits to meet the demands of the captain, and the crushing sense of defeat when she pushes herself too far. A defeat that is even foreshadowed after the Surprise's first battle with the Archron, as we hear Captain Jack telling Mr. Allen.
I do understand your point, Mr. Allen. Your knowledge in these areas is beyond question. However, a week spent crawling through the Brazilian rainforest looking for a new mast simply will not do.
Likewise with Star Trek, though, the ship is a part of the crew. No matter how many times Scotty claims,
"I can't change the laws of physics,"
we know that the Enterprise will somehow squeak out just a bit more, because the Enterprise is just a bit better than any other Constitution-class ship out there. It digs a little deeper and pushes herself a little harder than other ships in the fleet. Of course, as Tuvok would say,
"Curious. I have never understood the human compulsion to emotionally bond with inanimate objects."
But Janeway's response is the fans' response.
It's much more than that. This ship has been our home. It's kept us together. It's been part of our family.
It makes no sense to outsiders. But we, the fans, we know that the Enterprises, Voyager, and even the Defiant, they were more than just a collection of wires and bulkheads. They were every bit the crew member on the show that Kirk and Spock were. It's why in the motion picture, we are treated to a full 4.5 minutes of seeing the Enterprise from the outside as Kirk and Scotty approach. Just like with Spock, Kirk, McCoy, and Scotty, we are being reintroduced to a character that we haven't seen on screen for a decade. And it's why, at the end of Search for Spock, when we watch the Enterprise streak across the atmosphere, we're impacted so deeply. This wasn't just the destruction of the good guy's ship. This wasn't just the loss of their home. It was a character that we knew and loved streaking across the sky, bright as a comet. It felt no different than watching any other character sacrifice himself for the rest of the crew. One of my favorite things to see in sci-fi shows are crew members that genuinely care about each other. After all, I care about these people, and I like it when the people I care about each other as well. Now, maybe a bit of this caring was forced by Roddenberry's no internal conflict rule, but the writers could have written Star Trek to be a bunch of crew members who never fought, but also didn't care about each other. Instead, Star Trek is loaded with moments of care for one another. We see McCoy coming to give Kirk a pep talk, of sorts, after being called Captain Dunsel. We see Seven of Nine going out of her way to care for Tuvok after he was blinded by her actions in Year of Hell. We see the guilt Harry Kim wrestles with after his miscalculations resulted in the death of everyone aboard Voyager. We even get to see them play jokes and give good-natured jabs at each other's foibles.
I won't tell anyone if you don't.
Riker, the Horgon has fought a friend.
I see. Someone close to you.
That's right.
Someone you love.
I wouldn't go that far.
Simply adjust the frequency, throw this switch, and the Enterprise should answer.
That was the Jailbreakers with their latest recording.
Sort of earthy, peaty aroma, with a touch of lilac.
Trust me, next time you see him, just sniff the air and go, "Is that lilac?"
And I have to say, this is one of my favorite aspects of Master and Commander. Far too often in war movies, you have the stoic soldier. People who trust each other with their lives on a professional level. The gruff sergeant who rallies the troops. The heroes that are bigger than life that bullets refuse to touch. But they ultimately stand alone. In Master and Commander, though, we keep coming back to officers eating around the table. And I don't know. Maybe it's because I come from a larger family, where between the adults and kids, there would be 22 rowdy people shoved around a table for Thanksgiving. But these scenes remind me of those family get-togethers, right down to the boisterous laughter, the one family member who never quite got the joke, the older nieces and nephews trying to join into the conversations, along with those quiet, somber moments. Even when they're not all around the table, you can see that Captain Jack genuinely cares about the members of the crew, that not one life is going to be needlessly spent. We get to see this up close and personal when the captain begins to reprimand Mr. Hullum for not acting as an officer ought, and assumes it's just because he's still more or less a young man, just to find out that Mr. Hullum is turning 30 on Friday. The captain is baffled at this, because Mr. Hullum is still a midshipman. He's failed becoming a lieutenant twice, and yet Mr. Hullum is also a good sailor. How could he still be in this position even though he's almost 30? And there's this poignant silence that follows, as the two of them both come to the same conclusion, that it's because Mr. Hullum is not cut out for this job. Yet Captain Jack still tries to encourage him, to guide him to be the man Mr. Hullum desires to be. And I love it. It's this idea of a family of friends forged through the trials aboard their beloved home, all by themselves, in a vast universe filled with storms and enemies and new discoveries to be had around the next bend, that makes Master and Commander feel so much like Star Trek. But wait, there is one more way that it reminds me of Star Trek. As the good Doctor and Captain Jack enjoy a quiet reprieve, celebrating their victory, the Doctor comments that his assistant is going to be aboard the captured Archon, and he makes for a better Doctor than no Doctor at all. Surprised, Jack comments that he met their Doctor, and he got his sword from them. Realization dawns on them that the captain of the Archon disguised himself as the Doctor, and Captain Jack orders that they change course to escort the Archon back to port. The Doctor is saddened that once again he will not be able to examine the birds on the Galapagos Islands, to which Jack replies,
"The bird's flightless.
Yes.
It's not going anywhere."
Just like TOS, you got to make sure that you end on a joke as the journey continues. Guys, I hope that you've enjoyed this video because I had a blast making it. And if you want to support me in making more of these videos, by all means, please come and join me either on Subscribestar or Patreon. I truly appreciate it. And I can't promise, in fact, I can just about promise that not every video is going to be as long as this one was. John, you lucked out, my friend. You chose a topic that happened to be one that really resonated with me. Until the next time, everyone, may the Lord bless and keep you. May the Lord cause his face to shine upon you and be gracious to you. May the Lord lift up his countenance upon you and give you peace. Amen.